I'm here with Dr. Taryn Marie, who is one of the global heavyweights of what I would call the resilience movement, which is a concept I've been coming across more and more. And I would feel myself capable of introducing it, but I'd rather hand over to you. What is resilience about, and how did you come across it?
Yeah, well, I would say resilience, to your point, is definitely having its moment right now. So probably 3 weeks ago, resilience was nice to have. It was like, oh, isn't that cute? Resilience, it's really lovely. And now it's really a must-have. We're all in a moment where we're looking for tools and tips and life rafts to keep us afloat amidst everything that we're experiencing personally, professionally, individually, within our communities and globally. And so on the one hand, I would never, never wish for this type of pandemic or experience to befall us as, humanity, right? And on the other hand, we have the opportunity to learn a lot and to become more resilient. And, I think something that I talked about a while, probably a decade ago, and it's been a number of years since I've used this illusion, but it's really come back up for me recently, which is the idea that the Chinese character for crisis is this compilation, right, of danger and opportunity. And so we're in this moment right now, and I think that's resilience, right, is being able to hold both, being able to navigate the polarity that exists between danger and opportunity, acknowledging both of those and allowing those both to be true simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us a bit of history about how you came into the movement or the field?
Yeah. So over a decade ago, it really was my patients in neuropsychology that taught me about resilience. And so I was a young pre-doctoral fellow at Virginia Commonwealth University Medical Center, and I was looking at really trajectories of rehabilitation after brain injury and spinal cord injury. Mm-hmm. And there's, just as we're realizing now, to a greater extent, how connected we all are as humans amidst this global pandemic. What I also realized over a decade ago is that as humans, we're also really connected with each other when we're in the ICU or the emergency room, because we all have a single question on our mind, which is, if we're the one who's injured or sick, we want to know that we'll be okay. And if it's our family member, we want to know that our family member is going to be okay. And so as I walked into those, to those rooms where people had really life-changing neurological injuries, brain injuries and spinal cord injuries, I was 28, 29, to give them the news about, what the prognosis was going to be for their family member. Everyone has the same question, right? They want to know what's going to happen to their family member, and what does that mean for that person, and what does that mean for them and for their family, and how will things change? And we were basing our diagnosis, or our prognosis rather, on the age of the person, the severity of the injury, and then the localization of the injury. What parts of the body had been impacted by that brain injury or that spinal cord injury? And what we found through, several months of kind of follow-up in our outpatient clinic is that so often we were wrong in our prognosis. We weren't giving people accurate information when they needed it the most. And so we started to ask ourselves, well, why are we wrong? People were doing better than we thought or worse than we thought, but rarely were we ever really hitting that target. And so that led some other folks that I was working with at the time and I to start to mine the data and to look at all of these other factors that existed, in people's lives. Did they live in a rural setting? Did they live in an urban setting? Who else was in the home? What was their socioeconomic status? Things like that. And so we were able to statistically really look at what were the other factors that were influencing people's rehabilitation And what we found was things like having access to reliable transportation made a significant difference in how positive people's rehabilitation outcomes were. And so I think, we found something to the extent of like, if you had access to reliable transportation, that statistically speaking, could be the difference between living independently and living in an assisted care facility, just by having access to transportation. And so when I finished my fellowship, I started to really think about what this might mean for the rest of us, because we're not all going to have neurological injuries, and thank goodness for that, right? And we all are going to face challenge. It's not if, it's when, it's inevitable. And so what if we knew those couple of things, like having access to transportation could make a difference for us? What if we knew what our factors were that would enhance our trajectory and make us more resilient? And so it was really my patients that initially taught me about this concept of resilience, these things that exist in our lives that make an appreciable difference when we face challenge. And then I started to think about, how do we figure out what those things are for the rest of us, both in leadership and in life, which led me for the last decade to conduct qualitative research now with hundreds of people and collect thousands of pieces of data, just starting with a simple question, which was asking people, and for those of you listening in, you can consider this for yourself as well. When you've faced a significant challenge, what allowed you to effectively address that challenge? And by the way, Alex, that language is intentional. First of all, the use of the word effectively address, because so often in the English language, we talk about overcoming challenge. And I think that's a fallacy. I think very few of us feel like we've overcome challenge. If anything, challenge overcomes us, or at least I've felt overcome by challenge. There are very few challenges I have overcome, but many a challenge has overcome me. And the second part is, so effectively address is important. And then the word challenge, because also we use words like adversity, which just means it's completely negative. And I think what we realize, and even applying it to this moment in time, this kind of global coronavirus pandemic, right? It's not all negative. It's not all positive, but it's a mixed bag, right? And that's what challenge is. Challenge is both the difficult and the adverse, and it's also the incredibly positive moments of gratitude and growth and compassion and wisdom that inevitably arise. So that led to now my empirical model, which is the five practices of particularly resilient people. So the 5 things that we can all do in a moment of challenge that makes us more resilient in our lives.
Brilliant. And we will get to those for sure. There are a couple of threads that you left in that last paragraph, though.
Tell me what I need to tie up for you.
No, I just want to chime in. So one of the core principles of biohacking for me is exactly what you spoke to, which is taking the ideas which make sick people normal and applying those same principles to normal people to make them better, if you will. So that's exactly what you're alluding to there. And also about that question, I'm a firm believer in another principle, which is that the quality of your answers depends on the quality of your questions. So that's what that sparked in me.
I love that. Yeah. As we say in research and in data, right, it's like garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have a good model, or you're not asking good questions, you're not going to get good data. And we also want the data that we're getting to be relevant in the places and spaces that we're applying that data, right? And so, I think when you look at leadership development and executive development, where I've spent the last decade in the corporate setting, if we want to know how people are successful, then we need to study people that are successful. And if we want to know, how we learn from failure and how we learn from those lessons, then we need to study failure, right? But you don't necessarily learn about success by studying failure, right? And you don't learn about failure by studying success. And so I wanted to understand resilience by understanding how people were resilient, how people understood that they had been effective in moments of facing challenge, and what were those things that they did that allowed them to be resilient in those moments.
Okay, so can we extend on that? Because just before we started recording here, you said that you've had a bit of a tough day. Could you explain how you coped with that day and how you use these practices right now, or like just before?
Yeah, absolutely. I am, what I'll say is I am very much in the middle of a tough day.
Mm-hmm.
And I might get emotional about that. I hope you and folks feel okay about that. I want you to know that I feel okay about it, so you don't feel like you need to take care of me. I feel great about sharing my emotions honestly.
Spoiler alert, one of the practices is vulnerability.
That's right. Yeah. The first practice of the 5 practices of particularly resilient people is vulnerability. And I'll speak about this conceptually for a moment so that you all can understand this practice and where I'm coming from, and then I'll very much use myself as an example in this moment. So I think Brene Brown has found quite a bit of utility, quite a bit of value in her work around vulnerability. And so I'll say I wasn't terribly surprised to find that vulnerability also plays a significant role in the extent of our resilience when I was researching this. The way that vulnerability came out in my work when I was talking to people was this idea that when people were most effective in addressing challenge, they allowed their inside self to match their outside self, or the self that they were showing to the world. So the most resilient people weren't thinking or feeling certain things on the inside. It's like spirit fingers, thinking or feeling certain things on the inside, and then either not showing those or denying those or disowning those parts of themselves to the external world. They were allowing that to be congruent, right? To be aligned. And that's really call it capitalizes on resilience, if you will, in really 2 ways. So one, as we all know, as anyone who has tried to put on their game face or their brave face, we all know that that works for a period of time, but it takes a lot of energy to mask and to feel something on the inside and then pretend to be something else on the outside. So from a resilience standpoint, that takes more of our energy, right? And when we are not congruent or when we are not aligned, then we don't receive the support, the resources, the help, the information that we need, because people don't know that we need help. Right?
That's so interesting, because people are kind of trained quite aggressively to, when someone asks you, how are you, you say fine. And
it's automatic in a way.
Yeah, and what you're saying, it goes completely contradicts that, or is that fair to say?
I would say it completely contradicts that, with the appreciation that there are also, to your point, Alex, well-established social norms, right? And what do I mean by that? So if you and I are good friends, and you're like, hey, Taryn, how are you? How's your heart today? How are you dealing with all of this, then I'll be like, Alex, here's what's going on, right? And I'm about to tell you. And but if you and I are passing each other in the hallway, right? Like pre-coronavirus, we'd be closer than 6 feet. If you and I are passing each other in the hallway and you're like, hey, how are you? And like you keep going and I'm like, I'm good, and then we keep going, right?
I'm dying on the inside. No.
What?
I'm dying on the inside. No, just say fine.
Yeah, you're dying on the inside, right? So there's set and setting, right? It's knowing when are those moments and who are the people, right? Who are going to be able to show up in those moments of challenge for us. And something that I like to talk about relative to vulnerability is not everyone deserves to hear our vulnerability. Not everyone deserves to hear our resilient story. And when we're very much in a moment of vulnerability, especially if that's uncomfortable for us, how people respond to that vulnerability matters. And it's a very tender moment. It's a very, my good friend and colleague and mentor, Keith Ferrazzi, likes to talk about porosity, right? Like being porous and allowing things in. When we're in a vulnerable moment, we're very porous, right? Like things really impact us. And so just allowing anyone to bear witness to that moment, to be a part of it, can be dangerous. And so, and I mean that seriously. So finding the people who have the capacity, the desire, the ability to show up for us in those vulnerable moments is key. The important part is that we find them and that we engage them and we share that vulnerability.
Okay, so speaking to that, let's say that we, myself and the audience are your chosen people for being vulnerable towards or in front of.
Yeah.
What happened today, and how did you cope with it? Or how
coping. Yeah, I'm definitely not through it or on the other side. Okay, couple of things. One, I'm grappling with like 6 things simultaneously, which is also true of challenge, right? Rarely do we have just one challenge on our plate. Oftentimes it's several things that are happening. And so, for me, it's grappling with being a parent, trying to work full time, and now trying to be like a full-time teacher. Like these are 3 different jobs, right? Parenting, professional,
3 full-time jobs.
Teacher. What?
3 full-time jobs.
Yeah, they're 3 full-time jobs. And as of 2 weeks ago, they were smooshed together, smoosh, technical resilience term, right? Yeah. Smooshed together into like, here's your new normal, right? And so just grappling with not feeling like I'm doing a good job in any one of those areas that, professionally, I'm not showing up the way I want to. Personally, I'm tired. Parenting wise, having a lot of wonderful moments with my children, but also just feeling pulled between so many things. And then, trying to now kind of shoulder their education. So that's one thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, I'm feeling a lot of fear. I transitioned to being a consultant and doing my resilience work full time about 4 months ago, from Nike, where I was heading up executive development for the top 400 leaders. Mm-hmm. And I was getting a lot of inquiries, a lot of work around resilience. And I thought, great, this is the time to transition, to really do this and live my dreams. And within the span of about 30 hours to 2 weeks ago, all of the business that I had booked for Q2 and part of Q3 was either canceled or postponed.
Because of the crisis.
Yeah, because of the crisis. Yeah, because it was all in person. It was, keynotes, it was executive coaching in person, it was team building, it was workshops. And so I went from really having hustled hard the first 3 months of my business and being like, okay, financially I'm going to make it as a single woman who's the head of her household. I'm not currently married. To being like, wow, like I don't have any income right now and I need to evolve my business. And I'm the one holding down, my portion of the children's expenses. And, there's no like Mr. Taryn, right, on the mortgage. So, there's a lot of fear about that. Trying to, adjacent to that, reach for and evolve and build a business and have a vision for the contributions that I want to make to the world and how I want to be of service, and wondering, is that possible now in this day and age, or what does that look like, or how does that look different?
Absolutely.
I have moments, which are not today, but I have moments where I'm like, I've got this. I'm so excited. There's no time that's better for resilience than right now. And that's all still true. But today I'm in a moment of fear, and I'm in a moment of like, will I ever, this is a very limiting belief. And I want to acknowledge that. It's not very growth mindset of me. But
You're afraid.
I'm like, will I ever have another client? Is like, what if I spend all this money to evolve my business and I just and I'm not placing my bets in the right place because the landscape has changed. I feel afraid. I feel uncertain. It's frightening. And then the last part is, I think I'm really grappling with what it means to have a partner, right? Like a romantic partner, and what that support looks like. So a couple weeks before all of the coronavirus things, I felt very called to clean up my relationship table and, go to people that were part of my life romantically in a variety of ways, and release them, right? And to be clear that, I didn't necessarily think that they were going to be the one or were the one, and allow myself to free up that energy, and also allow them to free themselves up to, place their romantic and energetic bets elsewhere. And it's super hard not having a partner right now. I have a lot of wonderful friends. But there's that feeling of loneliness and aloneness, and at a time where it would really help a lot to have a romantic partner and that type of support, walking through what it means to not have that.
I hear you, and thank you for exposing or sharing your vulnerability. I personally appreciate it. I mean, it takes a lot of courage, and you definitely are drinking your own champagne, kind of going quite public with something quite personal. The kids part is okay, the career part, the work part is okay, but then the romantic part as well, that's next level. So thank you for sharing that. And we imagine anyone listening to this would be having an immense sense of support for you, so as I do.
Thank you.
Very nice. So that I guess we've covered the vulnerability part of the 5 practices.
Sure did do that.
What? And we don't need to go into such personal detail on the other ones, but what can you give an overview of the other ones, especially I think with regards to what's going on now, if you can personalize it a bit, I think that would be quite useful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just say one more thing about the practice of vulnerability, which is, and I think you really touched on it, Alex, that it's difficult to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And As I mentioned, Brene Brown and her research, has found a lot of benefits in vulnerability. I obviously have as well, as it pertains to resilience. And so I started asking myself and the people that I was conducting qualitative research with, about their own vulnerability, right? Like, why is it hard? If we know vulnerability plays such an important, can play such an important role in our lives, in connection, right? Like, I think you said it, like, you feel closer to me because I shared those things, right? Mm-hmm. Why aren't we all running around living these fabulously, vulnerable lives and fabulously authentic lives? Because vulnerability is the cornerstone of authenticity. We can't be authentic without being vulnerable in some way. And what came up is this concept that I've named and brought forth, which is the shame bias, which is the idea that we're not all living vulnerable lives because we're afraid that we won't be accepted when we share our true vulnerability. And so it's the idea that, in my mind, if you share something vulnerable about yourself, just as I did, I would feel closer to you. I would feel more connected to you. But then if I were to think about sharing something vulnerable for myself, I might think, oh, but, even though I think more of Alex for sharing, he'll think less of me if he knew I was grappling, with these things that I shared. And so we imagine that while other people's vulnerability enhances them in our eyes, we imagine that our own vulnerability will somehow diminish us. And it's simply not true. It's just a sort of a fundamental fear that a number of us have.
Shame bias.
What's that?
Called it the shame bias?
The shame bias. Yeah. Which is, really the primary reason why we're not all living these, kind of vulnerable lives. And the only way to test the shame bias, by the way, is to push through that fear, and so because we imagine there's kind of three, I call it the 3 L's, right? We imagine that if we tell people the truth, they won't like us, they won't love us, or they will leave. Right? Like, those are really our kind of core fears, mm-hmm. right? And that keep us from vulnerability. And so I would just encourage, those of you listening who want to try out your vulnerability, that if you feel afraid about that, it's really normal. And to find people who deserve to hear your story of resilience or your moment of vulnerability that you believe will support you. And try it out. And even if it doesn't go well the first time, keep going, because, you will find people that are able to support you.
So in this particular case, if someone is, I had a very close friend of mine have a slight panic attack last night or yesterday when she couldn't get hold of her bank. She thought the mm-hmm. bank had collapsed or something and was freaking out. And she reached out to me to tell me that story, and I kind of consoled her. So a piece of advice might be, hey, if you're feeling uncomfortable, reach out to someone, be vulnerable, ask for permission maybe, hey, can I be vulnerable,
Yeah, asking, even, I love that. Even asking people, hey, could I be vulnerable about something that I'm struggling with right now? Do you have time for me to be vulnerable? Do you have capacity to sit down with me and have this moment with me? And no is an acceptable answer, right? It's like setting a boundary for ourselves. Actually, I can't do that with you. But then you find someone who does have the capacity to be there, right, in that moment. So, yeah. The second practice of particularly resilient people is the practice of productive perseverance. And so this is the productive perseverance is really the intelligent pursuit of a goal. And so a lot of people ask me, about Angela Duckworth's work around grit, which is really, really wonderful if people aren't familiar with that. And so Angela Duckworth talks about, the extent to which people are able to be gritty and achieve their goals and really stay the course. And that's the
Did you write the book
maintain.
Grit?
What's that?
Did you write the book Grit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She wrote the book Grit. Yeah. She wrote the book on grit.
Yeah.
And so, that's the ability, to like stay the course, right? To maintain the mission.
What's the difference between grit and resilience in brief?
Yeah. So the difference is that if you have 5 practices of particularly resilient people, grit is 1/10 of resilience because it's half of the second practice. It's half of productive perseverance. So grit works really well in the intelligent pursuit of a goal if the landscape has not changed, right? Yeah. If I want to be a Navy SEAL, if I want to graduate from the Naval Academy, right? And I know what those particular requirements are, and I put my head down and I'm gritty AF. Can I say that? Mm-hmm. Right? And that works really good when the requirements haven't changed, right? Yeah. But for most of us right now in this moment, we are like the landscape is fundamentally shifting for so many different businesses. So we may maintain our goal, right? Like, my goal is to bring resilience to the world, to bring the concept of resilience and the hope and healing associated with that to the world. My goal may not change relative to productive perseverance, but the process for how I get there, the steps I take, may need to change, right? And so this is the intelligent pursuit of the goal, right? Knowing when to maintain the mission and when we need to pivot in a new direction when the landscape has changed. And this has always been true for so many entrepreneurs, and in medicine, we get new information and we adjust. Right. Yeah. And this is the moment where, productive perseverance is an art and a science. Yeah.
So the word productive, so you can persevere, but if you're persevering in the wrong direction, then it's not productive. So productive encapsulates the direction.
Precisely. We all know people, and perhaps we've been a person who's toiled too long in an area that hasn't, been fruitful. But we also have moments where maybe if we'd stayed a little longer, right, we could have, gotten to our goal. And so it is that polarity, that art and that science of knowing, how long do we maintain the mission, and when and how do we pivot in a new direction with the environment and the new information we're taking in. Yeah, I mean, we worry about kind of like the sunk expenses, right, of time and resources. But yeah, there's a moment when we may need to quit or repackage or take what we've learned and put it in a new direction, in a new environment, use that technology in a different way, right?
Okay, so sorry to bring it back to the case in point, current pandemic crisis, etc. And in fact, to your own personal experience of like having a rug pulled out from under your feet. This one kind of applies to that. You can persevere towards the goal, but like being productive would mean that there has to be some sort of dynamic change or flow, like around this particular kind of incident, obstacle. So it really applies to this, and for many other people as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a moment where we're all asking ourselves about our goals and about our businesses and how viable or sustainable they are. And so I think the point is here, we may need to set a new goal or new goals, but we may not need to. It might be just the process is different, right? Mm-hmm. So many of our businesses are now going online. We're developing more virtual capabilities, right? So maybe it's just about changing the way that you deliver business or changing how people experience your product and service.
Nice.
Right? And maybe just for a period of time, right? The only kind of constant is change, as we know.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Okay, yeah. Number 3.
Number 3 is the practice of connection. And this is also twofold in the sense that this is both the connection with ourselves. And so, we have this really tremendous moment where we get to find purpose in the pause. And so many of us have been able to spend more time in reflection, spend more time going inward, thinking, feeling, because we're not in the midst of, this constant motion, travel, frenetic, lifestyle. We're really, we're taking a big planetary time out in our homes. And so getting to explore a deeper connection with ourselves, trusting ourselves, listening to ourselves, asking really important questions like, what do I want? Who am I? Who do I want to become? This connection is really of critical importance, to be connected to ourselves, to know
So
ourselves
the
truly.
connection practice is to oneself.
Say it again.
The connection practice, it's connection to oneself, not to other people.
It's twofold. So the first part is to self, and the second part is to other people. Okay. The second part is the connection that we then have. So one part is internal, and the second part is the external component. So how are we connected outside of ourselves, right? What relationships do we have with our children and our family members, our neighbors, our communities? What are the connections that we create in moments in our lives, right? Like if we're diagnosed with cancer, many people join like a cancer support group, right? We wouldn't be part of that group if that wasn't an experience we were having, but being able to find those connections and communities outside of ourselves to support us in those particular moments. So connection is critical for resilience, both deeply knowing ourselves, and then there's lots of research that demonstrates even just having one person, who is a mentor or a friend, or even a very invested parent, right, who believes in us, that can make a critical difference in our ability to believe in ourselves and our success.
Nice. And so bringing it back to things, take the space, reconnect with yourself. I would imagine, contemplation, meditation, for that aspect, and then remembering to reach out to people who you care about or who care about you, etc., as an implementation of that practice right now.
Yeah, I think that's really important right now. I just did a post on social media on Instagram today, which said something to the effect of like, don't underestimate the impact, right? That like compliments, good morning texts, apologies, all of that is tremendously important always. And I think right now it has even more of a heightened, impact. So, check on the people that you care about, right? And even use this opportunity to check in with people that you haven't been connected with or haven't heard from in a while. I saw something else recently that was like, quarantine is not an excuse to text your ex, right? That could be true, but maybe it is. Right? Maybe it's an opportunity to, to check in with them and to see how they're doing. And even though you're no longer together, to let them know that you care. Nice. I've reached out to a lot of friends and family members and people that have formerly been important parts of my life, not to rekindle something, but to say, hey, I care about you. And you've been an important part of my journey, in my life. And like, how are you doing? Right? And really asking. Not just saying, hey, I hope it's going well, sending love, right? Which that's a thing you can do. But to really ask, like, how's your heart? How are you doing? Do you want to talk, right? That's really important right now because our physical separation means that that kind of like digital connection that we all have, that makes it even more important to sustain ourselves in these moments where it's very easy to feel lonely or alone.
Nice. Okay, on to number 4.
Number 4, for those of you keeping count, we're rounding the corner toward the end. So we've got gratiosity, which is the compilation of the word for gratitude and the word for generosity.
Yeah.
And the
That's
gratitude,
yours?
that's mine. Yeah. Yeah. When you do qualitative research, you get to make up words,
Yeah.
Just little known fact, right?
Nice.
And yeah, so gratiosity is a word that I made up. Look for it in the next rendition of Webster's dictionary.
Yeah.
And
your picture beside it.
Yes, that's right. So gratiosity is really about finding gratitude in our challenge, and I think from a humanities standpoint, we're doing well there right now, right? I mean, we're already saying like, hey, this quarantine thing is super weird and scary and unbalancing. And at the same time, we are like reversing global warming, and we can hear the birds chirping in the Wuhan province that they haven't heard in years. And the swans and the fish, are back, and the channels in Venice are clear and clean in a way that they haven't been in anyone's lifetime. And so being able to see the good in this. And sometimes we can do that in relatively short order. And sometimes that takes time, that takes introspection, that takes retrospection, right? To be able to look back and say, it's not what I would have wanted or what I would have chosen, but I can see the good in that. I can see, I can feel gratitude for what I experienced. And then the generosity part is about then sharing those lessons with other people, right? So that we are generous with our lessons so that people have the opportunity to learn vicariously by what we've been through.
Beautiful.